And then sometimes, though this isn't very frequently done, but it's a custom that's gaining traction, is for wives to offer their husbands a blessing. And so one possibility is this line from the book of Psalms, which says, Mi ha'ish hachafetz chaim ohev yamim lirotov, right? Who is the person who seeks to live, who loves his days and sees good? Nitzor lashoncha mera usvatecha midaber mirma. So a person who guards his tongue and his lips from speaking guile. Sur mera ve'aseh tov, one who turns from evil and does good. Bakesh shalom verodvehu, and seeks peace and pursues it. And a melody for that is like this. Mi ha'ish hachafetz chaim ohev yamim lirotov netzor leshon chamera usvatecha midaber mirma sur merav yaseh tov bakesh shalom verodvehu. I love that tradition, both of those traditions on Shabbat. How often do we take the time to really acknowledge the blessings that we have in our life from our children or our spouses? Many of us, even the best of us, take those closest to us so much for granted. And Shabbat, in general, is an opportunity for us to recognize the small and large blessings that we have in our lives, to not take the little things for granted. Right? That's the blessing of taking a day to step back, to scope out the landscape, to look back at it. Right? Imagine, this is why I think one of the reasons God stopped creating on the seventh day. Because without stopping, you can't stand back and get perspective and see the beauty of what's out there. See the beauty of what you have. So God stopped creating on the seventh day to take a step back and say it was very good. And so we stopped creating on the seventh day. We stopped working on the seventh day to give ourselves an opportunity to step back and say, I'm so blessed to have my children. I'm so blessed to have my wife. I'm so blessed to have my husband. And that's a really important component of the next part of the Shabbat evening ritual, which is Kiddush, which means to sanctify the day. Right? Normally Kiddush is understood to be the blessing over wine, but actually the wine is a minor component of Kiddush. The wine really just serves to beautify the Kiddush itself. Kiddush is sanctifying the day, declaring that the day is holy, is different than all the other days of the week. Wine is hidur mitzvah. Wine beautifies that moment. Now there's two different traditions. One is to sit and one is to stand during Kiddush. My tradition at home is to sit, following a custom from the Talmud that says "Ein Kiddush ela bimkom suda." Right? One should only do Kiddush in a place that they're going to eat. So many people sit during Kiddush because it's the place that they're going to eat. Others stand during Kiddush because of the idea that when you are declaring something holy, you should be standing. Either custom is fine. I'm going to sit right now primarily because I want to be able to see the camera, and I'm unable to do that standing up. I'm right now using grape juice. Grape juice is something you could use. Wine is something that many people use. It's also possible to use other drinks as well if you don't happen to have those at home. The idea is whatever might beautify the moment, right? So if you find on Friday evening that you don't have grape juice or wine, right, but you have some scotch or something like that, you could use that if you wanted to. The blessing would be a little bit different, but normally I'm going to do the way it normally goes, which is the blessing over wine or grape juice. And one custom that I'm going to show you is this custom of placing the cup in the palm of your hand like this, which is a Kabbalistic custom, a Jewish mystical custom, which comes from the idea that on Shabbat we unify heaven and earth. So the cup symbolizes heaven coming down into the open palm, which is earth. And the Kiddush, going back to how I introduced it, saying it's related to this idea of stepping back and counting our blessings, right? The imagery of Kiddush is of God taking a step back from creation and looking over the landscape and seeing its beauty. And reminding us a couple of times during the prayer that God gave us Shabbat be'ahava uveratzon. That God gave us Shabbat with love and with will, because of the beautiful opportunity it affords for us to think carefully about our lives, to really take stock, and to feel the deep love that God has for us and that we have for each other, that we don't have many other opportunities, we don't take many other opportunities to express. So Kiddush goes like this. It starts with a passage from the Torah, from the book of Genesis. Vayihir vayiboker yom hashishi vayichulu hashamayim va'aretz v'chol tzeva'am vayichal Elohim b'yom hashvi'i melachto asher asa vayishbot b'yom hashvi'i mikol melachto asher asa vayivarech Elohim et yom hashvi'i v'yikadesh oto kivo Shabbat mikol melachto asher bara Elohim la'asot. And then many people go savri, and then people respond l'chaim, what we do in our household anyway. And then we say the blessing over the wine. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu b'shabbat kodsho b'vavratzon hinchilanu zikaron l'maseh breshit ki hu yom techila l'mikra'ei kodesh zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim ki vanu v'acharta ve'otanu kidashta mikol ha'amim ve'shabbat kodshecha ve'ava uvratzon hinchaltanu Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh hashabbat. Now note that I didn't drink the grape juice, the wine, until after the whole blessing, which should indicate again that this is not exclusively a blessing over the wine that we're doing, but ultimately a blessing about sanctifying the day of Shabbat. And so I only drink the wine after the conclusion of the whole blessing, which concludes, Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh HaShabbat, blessed are you, Adonai, who sanctifies the Sabbath. Now, by the way, there is a custom to have 3 meals during the course of the 25 hours of Shabbat. Right? So, since the Jewish day, as we discussed, begins in the evening, the first of those meals is on Friday night. The second of those meals is Saturday lunch, right? So well, we might have a kiddush in shul, or lunch at home following services. Right? Saturday lunch, Saturday late morning, early afternoon. Right? That's the second meal, and the third meal is called Suda Shlishit in Hebrew. The third meal, clever name, or Shalashudis, which is the Yiddish for third meal, clever name. Now, the rabbi said that if you have only enough money to provide for one meal on Shabbat, take a guess which one they said. They said lunch. Why? Because if you have a big meal on Friday night but have no food left for Saturday, Shabbat will be miserable. One could go to bed hungry at night and still be okay. So the most important meal comes actually Saturday lunch, which most people don't realize, because most people dinner is culturally a more important meal for us. So dinner has become people's expression of Shabbat more than anything else. But I do want to invite you to try your hand at Shabbos lunch at home, and I bring that up at this moment for 2 reasons. One, because there is a kiddush for Shabbat lunch, right, which is similar to what we just did, although it's much shorter and a little bit different. But it also is done over wine. And the second, because every meal in the rabbinic tradition is not really a meal unless there's bread, right? And on Shabbat we eat a special kind of bread which is called challah. I'll show you in a moment, right? Which is just a beautiful, lovely, delicious egg bread usually, although there are different flavors being made now. My mom made the other day a pumpkin chocolate chip challah. But there is a custom on Shabbat to not only have one loaf of bread, but to have 2 loaves of bread. And the reason for that is twofold. The first is, like with the candles, to hold in both of our hands the dual nature of Shabbat, shamor v'zachor, right? The joyous, positive celebration of Shabbat, and the rigorous discipline of the cessation of labor on Shabbat. They'll have both of those simultaneously. But there's another reason. And the other reason is that in the Torah, the Israelites are sustained in the wilderness by manna, bread that fell from heaven. And one of the peculiar features of manna was that you couldn't store it over from day to day. You could take as much as you needed for your family each day, but if there was any left over, it would rot by the next morning and be inedible. Which poses a problem on Shabbat, because if you collect on Friday, only enough for Friday, you won't have anything for Saturday. You won't have any for Shabbat lunch or for Shabbat day, because you can't go out and collect things on Shabbat. It's one of the prohibitions on labor. You can't take things from outside and bring them inside. As a sidebar to that, right, one of the most challenging components of traditional Shabbat observance is the prohibition on carrying between a private domain, say your house, and the public domain, say the street, on Shabbat. Right? So I can't technically, I'm not supposed to take something, an object, out of my house on Shabbat and bring it to the outside, and vice versa. Unless, like we have around this area here, we have an eruv, which transforms a lot of public space into one large private space, which would enable us to carry within it. Right? So that's actually what we have here, very thankfully, because it enables us to carry on Shabbat. But in the time of the Torah, the institution of an eruv hadn't been invented yet. So people couldn't leave their homes and go collect manna on Shabbat. And if they were to collect enough on Friday for 2 days, it would rot by the next day. They would have nothing to eat on Saturday. So in addition to the miracle of the manna in the first place, God causes another miracle to happen in the Torah, which is that the double portion of manna that the Israelites were able to collect for themselves on Friday didn't go bad on Saturday. That we had a double portion on Friday that would sustain us through Shabbat. And so we honor that double portion by having 2 loaves of bread on the table. Right? So in between Kiddush and actually beginning the meal is a ritual called Netilat Yadayim, which means washing the hands, a ritual washing of the hands, which is actually something that we do all the time in Judaism, not just on Shabbat. Whenever we are going to eat a meal with bread, we're supposed to wash our hands. And the idea behind that is that every person's table is meant to be an expression of the altar that existed in the temple in Jerusalem. Right? Our family tables, our meals, are sacred. Amazing idea in the Jewish tradition. And like we would have to do in the temple, we don't approach sacred space impure. We don't approach sacred space unprepared. So ritual hand washing is a way in which to spiritually prepare ourselves for the holy moment of eating at the table. And so I'm going to actually skip over that now because I don't have a hand washing station here in the room with me. But we would normally wash our hands with a blessing, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kichanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu Al Netilat Yadayim, which means you are bountiful, Adonai, our God, Majesty of the universe, who has sanctified us with divine commandments and has commanded us to wash our hands. Now, normally the tradition is to not speak between washing your hands and making the blessing over the bread. I'm obviously going to speak now because, one, I didn't really wash my hands, and two, because I want to explain what I'm doing here. But now we come to the actual meal, which is begun by the blessing of the bread. But I want to say another quick thing about this. So you notice that our bread has been covered until now by this cover. And there are a number of reasons given for that. I'm going to give two. One is not technically the reason we cover the bread, but I love it. There's a Bubba Maisa that's developed that says we cover the bread so the bread is not embarrassed that we bless the wine before it. I love that idea Jewishly, that we're so concerned about embarrassing others that we're even concerned that bread is going to be embarrassed. Amazing. And I hope that's a value that we live in our lives, that we're that concerned about everybody else as we are about bread. But there's actually a technical reason. In the Jewish tradition, there's a hierarchy of blessings. And normally speaking, the blessing over bread takes precedence over every other blessing of food when you have both at the meal. Because you could actually make the blessing over bread to cover your bases over everything you're going to eat at the meal. Because bread is the symbol of the meal itself. But we do Kiddush on Friday night, and we do it before we eat, right? And remember, Kiddush isn't about the wine; it's about sanctifying the day. We do it over the wine to make it more beautiful. So we cover the bread so as to pretend that the bread isn't there. Because were we to see the bread, we would actually have to bless that first instead of the wine. So we cover the bread to pretend like it's not actually at the table. And so a lot of people have special coverings, like this beautiful one that we got in Israel, to cover the bread until it's time for hamotzi.